Jason Jones is a film producer, author, activist, popular podcast host, human rights worker. He's president of the Human Rights Education Organization, HERO, and the director of the Vulnerable People Project. In 2006, he was executive producer of Bella, which won several film industry awards, most notably the People's Choice Award at the 2006 Toronto International Film Festival. I've known Jason as a fierce warrior for humanity, serving the call of Christ. He's done so many amazing things, including rescuing people in the most troubled parts of the world. He has a new book out, The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset, and I've invited him to the Economic War Room to share his powerful perspective. Welcome, Jason.
Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you. All right, I've been reading your book, and it takes a very different approach to the Great Reset. I mean, traditional Great Reset is scare us all. I think you even said it in the book. It's scary campfire stories. Mm-hmm. Scare us all, and then send us money. That's kind of the answer. Here's your political answer. Vote for the. You take a very different approach to how, number one, we uncover the Great Reset and realize where it's coming from, and number two, how do we respond to it?
Yeah, I think I approached the Great Reset, I think, through two unique lenses because of the nature of my work running the Vulnerable People Project. For over 20 years, I've served ethnic and religious communities facing genocide. I've been very engaged in the pro-life movement since I was a young man. And so I look at this through sort of an anthropological. I look at the Great Reset through it's really a war on the Christian understanding of the human person. The Christian understanding of the human person first revealed in the Jewish scriptures that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and then more fully exemplified through the incarnation of Jesus Christ. This vision of the human person changed everything. When I was a young atheist and I would hear Christians talk about the good news, I thought that was so corny. They should come up with something different. That's strange. It just struck me as strange. But when you realize when the gospel, the good news, collided with these civilizations that were brutal and cruel, and how they viewed themselves, not only how they saw others, but how they saw themselves was so far from the truth of their dignity. You can still see it in the world today, where the Yazidi in Iraq, Christians, Jews, and Muslims won't eat something that a Yazidi touches. In India, you have the Dalit who are taught that they're less than human, and sadly, they will believe this about themselves. When the gospel arrives and says, not only are you not less than human, you are created a little lower than the angels, we're told, and even more mysterious, you are created in the image and likeness of God. This vision of the human person is an obstacle to ideological thuggery, to tyranny.
You even
to
use the
despotism.
term, the new ideologies of evil. What does that mean?
Well, in many, they're not actually new, but they're new manifestations of dark ideologies that have lurked forever. Those ideologies are victimism, transhumanism, Gnosticism, anti-humanism, and climate cultism. But I think the one that is really new, and new in being, it is a response to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's called victimism. Today, you can look at the war in Gaza. Both sides are appealing to us that they're the victims, both sides.
Right.
And the reason they have to do this is because the gospel of Jesus Christ has really conquered the heart of the world, in that we have a heart for the victim.
Right.
You can't imagine somebody appealing to Caesar, hey, side with us, we're the weaker party here. It's not going to work. So
it's the greatest victim wins, almost. And, well, I had this happen
but they're
to
not
me.
the real victim, right?
Yeah.
So what victimism is feigning concern for the vulnerable to acquire wealth and power at the expense of the vulnerable. So I'll give you an example. Two great obvious examples of the border. There's a powerful new ad campaign out from Catholic Vote called Protect the Vulnerable, Secure the Border. Every 11 seconds, an American child dies from fentanyl. I don't know anyone who doesn't know a young person who's died from fentanyl. I don't know anyone. The migrants. We have millions of migrants trapped in an underground economy with no legal protection. They're dying in the desert, being exploited when they get here. And then the new immigrants who come here legally are the ones whose very wages are being undercut by the migrants that are being exploited in the underground economy. But what the victimists do, who profit off exploitation politically, they profit off of it economically, they are always talking about how much they love the vulnerable, how much they love the migrants. I'm Catholic, but our bishops profit incredibly off of the broken border. The USCCB profits incredibly off the broken border. So you see them giving the Catholic imprimatur to broken policies that actually lead to the exploitation of the vulnerable. Once you know that victimism is the mechanism of exploitation. So, for example, the climate cult. They tell us that the solution to everything is the EV, the electric vehicle. I call them BVs, blood vehicles. Every electric vehicle has cobalt that was harvested by hand by children as young as 6 in a toxic muck. Every 80% of the world's cobalt comes from Congo. 80% of the world's cobalt goes to electric vehicles. No electric vehicles, no child forced labor in cobalt mines.
So do we not mine cobalt here?
Well, what we can do is pump oil. Where you have, I'm from Hawaii, and my hobby is boxing and mixed martial arts, and it's this gym I train at. It's a very big sport in Hawaii. It's like our sport.
Yeah.
And at gym I train, there's this Hawaiian boy. He's like just like a Hawaiian young man with a big pickup truck, the big Hawaiian flag driving through the hill country of Texas. I'm like, what brought you to here? He said, I work in the oil fields.
Oh.
I get to buy a house, I get to drive a truck. You know, so you have young men in America making great money, and you have children harvesting cobalt. The most of the emissions on our roads don't come from exhaust from internal combustion engines. Do you know where most of the pollution comes from? The tires of electric vehicles.
Wow.
Because they have to be 30% bigger, they have to be stronger, because the batteries are so heavy. And not to mention, the batteries, once they're dead, are just a toxic cesspool. And I'm not even talking about the lithium that they get from Central America that's devastating their rivers. It's all about the climate,
fires,
all about the environment.
When they can't put out the fire on the electric vehicle, or the fact that they're coming from China and the Chinese
cobalt
manufacturing.
Mines, the Christian slave children are working at in Congo are owned by the CCP. That's victimism. So once you understand the COVID policy caused the greatest famine since World War II. We didn't talk about that. We talked about our Zoom fatigue, and we're so tired of Uber Eats. Yeah. The greatest famine since World War II. So once you understand the mechanism is actually exploiting the vulnerable for power, we can reach the average American who may not have been as well-formed as we have been in the principles of liberty, but they do have a heart for vulnerable people. So once you can understand the trick, we can show the magicians, we can point to the magician's trick, the Great Reset will unravel.
Yeah, no, it's a different perspective. You're taking repackaged old ideologies. You've listed 2 of them that are fairly new. I mean, the climate cult and the victimism, they're fairly new. But you've got 3 more that you covered: Gnosticism, transhumanism, and anti-humanism. And I want to cover those. We have to take a break. But when we come back, I'd like to talk about those other 3. And then I want to dive into how do we address the culture so we can educate people, and then what solutions can we bring to stop the Great Reset and go back to the truth of Christ. Thank you. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
I'm Kevin Sorbo. When you spend money, you consider who you're buying from and the causes they support. If you don't, then you're likely supporting companies that are trying to destroy our country and take away our freedoms. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They're a cell phone company and a good one. They offer nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks, along with 100% US-based customer support. But here's the deal. Patriot Mobile's mission has nothing to do with cell phones. They carry out their mission by giving back millions of dollars every year to Christian conservative causes that are actively engaged in the fight to save America. Voting is no longer enough to beat the woke. We have to band together, support like-minded companies, and vote with our dollars. That's how we win. Stop supporting companies that want to destroy America and join Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call patriot.
The Great Reset, you describe it, it lives off 5 ideologies that are really evil. And we've covered victimism, which is, you describe in your book as the counterfeit of Christian ethics.
Yes.
You know, you feel good, you're doing something, but you're doing something bad, actually.
It's the opposite of solidarity, masquerading as solidarity.
Yeah. And you covered climate cultism on how the push to electric vehicles we say is going to save the planet, it's actually killing people.
Yes.
Let's go through the other 3.
And bad for the planet.
And bad for the planet. Gnosticism.
Yeah, Gnosticism is a trick, boy. It's old, right? The very early church, the church in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century was colliding with Gnosticism all the time. It's this idea that there's this elite that you can become a part of through various initiations where you have transmitted to you through some mysterious way knowledge.
Are we talking Skull and Bone Society at Yale?
Well, I mean, when people
that.
hear Gnosticism, they think of the occult, they think of Freemasonry, they think of the Illuminati, the Skull and Bones. But that's not really what it is. The early Christians, they really dealt with Gnosticism. What Gnosticism is, and the reason why the church has always opposed Gnosticism is because it creates division in communities that can't be healed through reason. So we come to truth through 2 ways. Revealed religious truth that's revealed to us by God and transmitted through the centuries by the body of believers. We can look to the teachings today and what we believe as Christians, and we can trace it back to the 1st century. We can read the writings of Christians in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century. We can see this continuity. We can judge it. We can see if there's breaks in teachings or breaks in beliefs. And then also through unaided reason unaided by revealed religious truth. What Gnosticism does is I'll give you an example, Facebook fact checkers. This is false, or this is partially false.
Yeah.
Well, then they don't explain it. This violates community standards. Well, that's more subjective. They don't tell you what those standards are either, because then you could hold them accountable. Amazon's not letting me run the trailer for this book because they says it violates community standards. They didn't tell us which standards it violated. That's actually Gnosticism. When you get something censored for being fake news or untrue, what do they call it? Disinformation. Right. But they don't address it. Well, that's Gnosticism.
Misinformation, malinformation.
Yeah, they are the Gnostic elite. But it's infected the right. And actually, I deal with this a lot. QAnon. You had people that were holding to something that was communicated through an anonymous source, that's ambiguous, that cannot be refuted nor proven. That's Gnosticism.
Yeah.
That's Gnosticism. And what makes it even worse is it would speak calumny about real human beings that it couldn't prove because they're citing an anonymous source that communicates ambiguously in ways that you can't verify. If you remember, it was Tom Hanks was being arrested. Tom Hanks died. It's a Tom Hanks clone.
Yeah.
It's quite strange, and people that I've respected have really been called into it. And I have a friend that was really into QAnon that had committed suicide. And that's what Gnosticism does. It creates anger, it creates fear, it creates confusion, and it creates a sense of impotency to react. And that's why, what was QAnon's motto? Trust the plan.
Whose plan? What plan?
Well, the plan that the anonymous, ambiguous
with pictures of things that were taken on Air Force One and all. Yes.
And that's Gnosticism. And that's why I wanted to include that into the book, because when I saw people that I loved and respected being seduced by Gnosticism, which is seductive when one is faced with what seems to be insurmountable odds. But the truth is, the Great Reset will collapse. The only question is, how much damage will it do in the process? Hitler's 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 and a half years. Stalin lasted 7 years. The CCP may last 100 if it's lucky. Ideologies of evil, because evil's a deprivation, collapse. But it can cause a lot of pain and suffering.
We have a lot of cultural pain and suffering.
Yeah,
what's going on in the culture? How do we address the Great Reset, which is being forced through the culture? How do we address that in our culture now? I mean, you've been involved in movie making, and that's uplifting to the human spirit. I mean, everything I've seen that you produced, even hard things, uplift the human spirit. How do we get that back?
Well, so I have an introduction to young Americans, which is my favorite part of the book. And the book has been really well received by the Gen Z, Gen Alpha crowd. And the introduction to young Americans is their path out of the Great Reset. I tell them it's very simple. It's love, piety, and posterity. What do I mean by that? They need to know why they were created. You're overwhelmed with all this information, but what does it really matter? Whenever I do any project, a new book, a new movie, I write down before I write the script or the book or even a plan, I was created to love God and to love my neighbor. So for young people, love God, love your neighbor. Who's the most important neighbor that we need to love as a young person? It's our parents. Love of our parents is the seed of all piety. And so the way out of the Great Reset begins with love in the family, love in the community, love toward your creator. Young people, as hard as this is in the day of the smartphone, in a world where perverse images are bombarding us constantly, preserve your moral imagination so you can experience eros, erotic love. The love that the Jews, when you read Jewish scripture, the love of God for man is always expressed through eros. And think of the Song of Solomon, right? We're adulterers, we're harlots. He loves us passionately and we betray him. So preserve the moral imagination so you can experience love in marriage the way it should be experienced.
Now, I've interviewed a lot of people. Michael Rectenwell, who wrote a book, Glenn Beck, who's written a book on the Great Reset. I have never heard that the answer to the Great Reset, although it just makes perfect sense, is love.
Love.
That's amazing.
Love. This is where now I'm getting to where the Great Reset collapses. Fall in love, get married, young people. Fall in love, get married, preserve that moral imagination. It's hard. You've fallen already. Dust yourself off, get back up. It's challenging. You know, you got that smartphone. All we had was the Sears catalog. Can I say that? Can I say that? This is true. This is true. Preserve your moral imagination, experience love, fall in love, get married, order your lives to serve your children and your community, the common good. And everything we do, our founding fathers taught us this, for our posterity. Everything our founding fathers did for our posterity. In my favorite movie, The Searchers, the old immigrant woman from Scandinavia said, "This is a hard land, Texas, but we're going to plant it. But once we plant our bones in this soil, it's going to be a wonderful place to live." This is how we need to think. We are living for our posterity. In Italy, for centuries, men and women, families planted olive trees that only their grandchildren would eat from. And this is how we are to order our life. The way out of the Great Reset is know why you were created, to love God, to love your neighbor, to fight for the common good, to get married, have children, order your life to serve your children, your community, and your posterity, and stand with the most vulnerable people in the world, because the Great Reset is raging. What we fear for us is happening. It's happening in Ukraine, Israel, in Gaza, Sudan. 1 million people are going to die this year. Nigeria, Christians are dying at an unprecedented rate. 9 out of 10 Christians martyred this year will be in Nigeria. So stand with the vulnerable at home, play checkers at the old folks' home on Wednesday nights, donate to Voice of the Martyrs or Vulnerable People Project.
It's a clash between life and death.
That's it.
We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Washington said paper money opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Jefferson said paper is poverty. Hamilton said to emit an unfunded paper as the sign of value ought not to continue a formal part of the Constitution. The founders hated paper money, so they put a pirate money clause in the Constitution for our state to use. Learn more at transactionalgold.com.
Jason, I think it's an incredible book. It's different than any book on the Great Reset I've ever read. It makes perfect sense. It's just like light and death, light and dark, life and death. It just separates them and helps you understand from a biblical Christian worldview perspective, how do we confront the Great Reset? And you had 5 core moral principles. These aren't banking principles.
No.
These aren't legal principles. These aren't government principles. These aren't money principles, what we deal with a lot here. What are the 5 core moral principles?
Well, the foundational one is, I call personalism, but it's really the proper understanding of the human person that Christians communicated to the world over the past 2,000 years. And that is that we all have a beautiful dignity, an inviolable dignity and worth. That is the foundation of everything humane in what we call the West or Western civilization. What we're really trying to conserve is the understanding of the human person in those institutions and those structures in civil society that were erected by Christians to honor and respect that proper understanding of the human person. C.S. Lewis said that if we could see ourselves as we really are, if we could see other human beings as they really are, they would be more terrifying and beautiful than angels. That as we walk down the street, we would drop to our knees in awe and couldn't walk down the street. But God must have put a veil before our eyes. You could get on one of Elon Musk's rockets and go in any direction for all of eternity, and you would never meet anything as wonderful as your neighbor who leaves his trash can out 4 days after pickup. And you're like, that jerk. But that jerk is like the most beautiful thing and the created thing in the cosmos. It's unbelievable. So we need to have a renewed reverence for the human person.
So that is personalism.
Personalism.
Okay.
Transcendent moral order. That is that there is a law above the laws of man. There is a law even above the World Health Organization. Yeah. There is a law above the Twitter and Facebook.
And by the way, you were just on with Frank Gaffney and Reggie Littlejohn and so forth. We just had Frank on our show. But that you call natural law.
It's natural law, the transcendent moral order. And that's obviously Christians trying to understand there's divine law and divine revelation. But there's a law that we can assess through unaided reason. Even Ayn Rand, the great atheist Russian philosopher that wrote Atlas Shrugged, said that human dignity is self-evident. It's axiomatic. Our founding fathers said we hold these truths to be self-evident. It is only self-evident. It is self-evident. But what really reinforces this is that we live in a society informed by the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, natural law. And as a result, there's got to be something above the government, above human law. Socialism can't have that. Marxism can't have it. They just say
Great Reset cannot have that. Cannot have that.
But these are just things that we know intuitively in our heart, or should know and see in the Bible says in the natural order.
Antigone, she knew it when she was ordered by her king not to bury her brother. She said, "There is a law above the gods of kings. There's a law above kings." Antigone said, "There's a law above the law of Zeus."
Ah.
Antigone said this. Yeah, there is.
So the third one is?
In the book, it's Humane Economies, number 3. Now, humane economy is what this show is all about. It's about what your whole apostolate, your whole mission is about. It's about the humane economy is an economy ordered around a proper understanding of the human person that's not driven by force, by violence, by fraud, but by a respect for a human being as a creature with dignity.
Or greed. We say money is a weapon, or it's a tool. It is not an end in itself.
Yeah, no, the biggest burden as someone who runs a nonprofit is I get to see with my major donors the burden of wealth, to deploy it and steward it properly. It's a burden because we're not libertarians. No offense, there's some libertarians watching.
Yeah.
But most libertarians are actually conservatives because they recognize freedom is to serve the common good.
But there is a moral authority. I mean, we don't believe... Who wants to go and say, hey, you can get 95% of the world strung out on drugs,
that's right,
but you'll become very wealthy?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that.
Or, we can have cheap phones in our pocket, but Uyghur slaves are assembling them in CCP China. Yeah. So, no, we want a humane economy that maximizes freedom while ordered to the common good, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity.
Yeah. And the purpose of money is not to get money. The purpose of money is to do good things, because nobody takes that into the afterlife. You can't take money with you. No. It's all left behind. Yes. So humane economy, then subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity is key. A distant, unelected bureaucracy should have nothing to do with your day-to-day life, should have nothing to tell you.
So can we call the European Union now and tell them?
World Health Organization.
You're not right?
Yeah, no, they're not right. Well, of course not. Subsidiarity has to be obliterated by tyrants. You saw it in Soviet Russia. You saw it in Nazi Germany. What happens is they have to obliterate those free institutions in civil society between the person and between the state. And they've gotten very cunning. They've eviscerated all the intermediary institutions with power. Now they want to divide us from each other. You're L, you're G, you're B, you're T, you're Q, you're plus, you're I. Like, no, it's divide, divide, divide. Leave you increasingly alienated. It's like C.S. Lewis's vision of hell in The Great Divorce, where we all have our little fire. We get further and further and further and further from each other. And C.S. Lewis says, the main character says, well, I get to meet Napoleon. No, he's too far away. And soon, all of us will be so far away, and soon all of our fires will go out. It'll be us alone in darkness. That is the Great Reset's vision.
Stella Morabito wrote The Weaponization of Loneliness on that same concept.
Yes.
The whole COVID thing was to isolate, divide, separate, and that's how you make people crazy.
Hence, let's move on. Yeah, and that's why solidarity is key. Solidarity to me is...
Number 5, solidarity.
Solidarity to me is the key, because what is solidarity? It is a victimism, feigning concern for the vulnerable for wealth and power. Solidarity is loving the vulnerable to becoming as vulnerable as they are, right? Christ said, the world hated me first, and then they will hate you. Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, is also about us as Christians. When Damien of Molokai left Europe, went all the way around the world in the 19th century on a sailboat to what? Serve lepers in Hawaii, get leprosy and die. True solidarity comes with pain and suffering. You do prison ministry, you do retirement home ministry, you work with married couples, you work with single moms at a pregnancy center. All of this comes with heartache and heartbreak and sadness. You have a relative that's lied to you time and time again because of drug addiction or a gambling addiction, but you love them, you stay with them. That's solidarity.
Being human, you're describing the way to break the Great Reset is to be human.
Yeah.
And
transhumanism was one of the, they don't want us to be human. The ideologies of evil we didn't get to was anti-humanism, abortion, embryo destruction, assisted suicide. Now in Canada, you can go get an assisted suicide for depression.
That's sad. All right, how do people follow the work? And I've described you when I brought you and I said, you're about to meet the true most interesting person in the world. How do we follow your work, Jason?
Well, I have a podcast, The Jason Jones Show. Please, 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 I poured my heart into this book. I think you'll see that. I really want young people to read this. I'm so happy that Turning Point USA and Students for Life of America are giving them to their students. Get the book wherever you buy your books. And thevulnerablepeopleproject.com. If you want to stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world, when the world is, no other group in the world dares go, that's where we look to serve. And when you stand with us, you stand with them. The Vulnerable People Project.
All right, we're going to summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get it at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.